More variety, less work in our mixed bouquets. That is the theme of today's video. We are going to go back in time to my 2024 spring season and look at how I was able to achieve a variety of flowers in my bouquets with a lot less work. You're going to see that in some of my weeks of vase arrangements of bouquets that I was selling retail, that 85% of those bouquets were comprised of flowers that either came back or were perennialized. And so that made for a lot less work on my end. So for those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Jessie. I am entering into my 4th year of flower farming. This past year, I learned a lot. I grew more flowers. And as I mentioned, some of these flowers that I grew before overwintered or perennialized. So it gave me a lot more variety to work with. Partway through my season, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer. And what that forced me to do was take a step back and ask myself, how do I make the most out of the 2025 season with a lot less time? I mentioned my last video where I talked about growing a local retail outlet in the form of a country store and how my mixed bouquets with variety had a part in that growth. It really made me take a step back and ask myself, hey, can I still achieve a similar level of variety, but without the intensive flower farming that you see some people run on bigger scale? And I think the answer is yes. So we're gonna go through picture by picture the bouquets that I had in, we'll call it later spring, so late May through all of June. And I think that this is a really important time to focus because especially for beginner flower farmers, people are always really excited and eager to have their tulips, maybe some daffodils blooming. Those usually bloom sometime in April for most of us in like a zone 5 to 7. But then there's a gap. There's about a gap of like a month and a half before the warm annuals start coming in. And so that's a shame because during this gap is really where these spring perennials and workhorses really shine. This is the time when they start pumping out blooms, and really you can almost like set it and forget it in the sense that you'll get a ton of flowers without needing to put in as much effort in terms of growing those flowers from plugs. Of course, you still need to do some level of maintenance with perennials, but it's way less work than babying a flower from seed or from plug. So when I took a step back and looked at the types of flowers that comprised of these reliable flowers, I'm putting them into 3 buckets. They are perennials. So perennials are flowers that come back basically every single year. They are reliable reseeders, meaning that even though they may not survive our winters here, they will reseed before they die, and they will either sprout in the fall before spring or in the early months of the spring. And the 3rd bucket is overwintered plants that are either, or they could either be like cut and come again from the previous fall. So the first 2 that I mentioned are going to make the lion's share of the bouquets that I'll talk about, but the 3rd one is definitely something for folks to consider, especially if they still have plants in the ground that might be able to make it to spring. So we're gonna get started, and I just want to preface by saying that I am only covering a very small quantity of flowers. There's so many types of spring flowers out there, and I'll talk about some of the stuff that I've already put into the ground for spring next year that are different from what I'm talking about. But what I want you to focus on is, one, seeing just how the different types of perennials that I have are either staggered in bloom time or provide a variety through color or habit. And then I also want you to think about when you have flowers in the ground, when are they going to come up? Meaning, are you going to have a variety of different types of flowers together so that you can make a mixed bouquet? Or would they be potentially blooming at different times, making it more difficult for you to make mixed bouquets? Now, this was something that I ran into in year 2. Even though I had done my work of overwintering flowers, I found myself in situations where I had flowers that bloomed that just didn't work well together. So that's why in year 3, you're going to see these bouquets looking a lot better, a lot fuller, having a focal, just taking the learnings that I had learned from year 2, and I'll try to inject those learnings in wherever possible. If you're a Patreon member, there's a lot more details in a post that I posted about this with more photos. And so head on over there if you want more of the details. All right, so the first arrangement over here is actually a vase arrangement that I put together to take photos for a premium vase CSA arrangement that I was going to sell. And basically this was going to be once a month, a premium vase arrangement, and it was going to change by month based off of the local flowers in season. So you can see over here, I don't have a ton of flowers. I primarily have like 3 types of flowers, but these 3 types of flowers are ones that are basically reliable in the sense that you can have them every single spring. So foxglove here, I learned that even if foxglove were to flower in year 1, this is foxy foxglove. If you leave it in the ground, it will actually flower again in year 2. So making it a reliable perennial, at least for those 2 years. Now, a lot of foxgloves are actually biannual, meaning that you need to put them in the ground in year 1, kind of let them do their thing, and they flower in year 2. So I'm talking about focusing on foxglove that will flower in year 1 and then get you subsequent blooms. So foxglove was one of those where I didn't have to plant again, and lilies over here. So these lilies, these first lilies were actually perennialized lilies. They were lilies that I grew in crates. I brought them into our pole barn to keep for the winter, and basically having them at a stable temperature that was a little bit warmer got them off to a faster start than those crates that were left out in the field, and they were able to bloom a lot earlier. So this photo is in late May, and you can also see that I have some bachelor's buttons here. So this is my first time growing bachelor's buttons. Bachelor's buttons reseed like crazy, so I kept them on here because if you have a patch of them, just like even a small patch, you will have a lot of stems. Now, that being said, I'm actually not growing bachelor's buttons next year. I pulled most of them out, so I don't think they're going to reseed. But I do think that if you need blooms sometime in like May, bachelor's buttons are pretty reliable for that. This next photo is actually about a week later. So this is late May. And you can see that we still have similar flowers as the ones before, but now we're adding a couple more blooms. So learning in year 3 is that different flowers, even though they're all categorized as spring blooming, are going to bloom later, right? So Nigella is one of them. It's going to bloom later than a foxglove, but it will still overlap. So in this case, I've got Nigella, which is a reliable self-reseeder. All of my Nigella this past spring came from reseeding. Let me tell you, I tried thinning out the patch and I could have thinned even harder. I had hundreds of stems of Nigella. My challenge with Nigella is that I can't get the stems to grow long enough and sturdy enough to use in bouquets. So I was able to sell a lot of them wholesale, but I would say maybe about a fifth to maybe a quarter were able to be used in mixed bouquets. I also have snapdragons here, and snapdragons here would be listed under the overwintered category. So unless if you live in a really, really cold zone, you should be able to overwinter snapdragons. I have done this in the past where I had a fall crop, cut it all the way down to the base, and then let it regrow in the spring without any cover, and it did well. Last year, I didn't do this, so these are new snapdragon here, but I am actually employing that practice again this year. I did not get a great crop out of my fall crop because of all the personal stuff happening, but I did cut them to the base, and they will hopefully come back again next year for spring blooms. What I like about spring snapdragon when you overwinter them this way is that they bloom a little bit earlier, provided that you're using the right variety. So I recommend anything in group 1, group 2, and the Potomac series, which just tends to be a little bit more resilient in both cold and hot type of weather. But basically, if you get the snapdragons early enough, for me, that's before Memorial Day, I can skip the thrips pressure. And if I try to grow snapdragon put in the spring, they typically bloom a little bit later, like in June, and I hit thrips pressure. So that's why I like having earlier snapdragon that's overwintered from the fall. And of course, you can see I also have lilies and foxgloves in these bouquets, and these bouquets went to the local retail store and they got gobbled up almost immediately. All right, now we're starting to head into early June, and I think the month of June is the most interesting and the most fun, honestly, especially for someone who has made the right decisions in their field and has been able to allocate a portion of their field to perennializing. So you're going to see in this photo, this is the first week of June, and more flowers are starting to come in, and certain flowers are going into like their next life cycle stage. So for example, I just talked about Nigella. At this point, the Nigella had turned into pods. I really love Nigella pods, especially when they're in this like chartreuse green type of color. They make for such an interesting pop of texture. But in addition to Nigella pods, now you have sea holly and mountain mint coming in. So I will say that the mountain mint coming in early June is very premature. If you cut at this stage, you have to be very careful with post-harvest hydration, because otherwise it has a chance of wilting, which is why like you're not going to see a lot of mountain mint until later on in the next few photos. But sea holly starting to come in, and sea holly here is still very early. It's still green. So similar to mountain mint, it does have a probability of wilting if you're not hydrating it properly. But over time, you learn which stems you can harvest. The positive about harvesting sea holly earlier is one, you do get this cool lime green color, but more importantly, it doesn't smell. There are some people who are very sensitive to the smell of sea holly. I would say I'm less sensitive, but when sea holly gets really blue, it's about to basically start drying out and go to seed, that stuff stinks. Like I can smell my whole row of sea holly basically like 100 feet away when it's in that prime smelling stage. So that's why harvesting it a little bit earlier, and there's time for this, will prevent that scent from happening. So I think it's also important to note over here that you're going to see some of these flowers have a really long bloom window. And that is awesome because it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of making bouquets. And hopefully you'll agree with me that these bouquets still look different. They have different color palettes. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that you can still make the bouquets feel really interesting by making sure you're selecting different types of colors or different types of habits, right? So let's actually look at the next photo over here, which is just 1 week later from the above photo. And really what you're seeing here is the yarrow starting to come in. Yarrow starts to come in for us during like the second week of June and has about, I would say like a month to a month and a half long window. Within this perennial category, there are also some like very reliable cut and come again workhorses, and yarrow is definitely one of them. Sea holly tends to grow multiple stems, but once you cut it, like it's kind of done for the spring. It might come back a little bit in the fall. Yarrow, you are going to consistently get stems, and a part of it is just that there's so many yarrow stems coming up, but not all of them are maturing at the same time. So you're getting a staggered bloom window. So maybe it's not necessarily cut and come again, but it's a very reliable workhorse. All right, so you can see here that the majority of this bouquet over here is comprised of perennials. You've got lilies, sea holly, yarrow, and then there are a couple of additional things that I planted that are not considered perennial. So for example, the first bells of Ireland had come in, as well as there is some Persian cress. Now, cress could also fit under this category of a reliable reseeder. The issue with cress is I love it. It's just not valuable enough of a crop for me to dedicate having space in there. I've actually tried growing it outside my landscaping and the deer will eat it. I do know a fellow grower at my co-op who basically sells a ton of self-reseeding cress every single year. She's able to do it without the deer eating it, and she's able to make a pretty good chunk of money off of reseeding cress. And there's a ton of different cress out there, right? So I think it's really worth looking into cress, especially if you want to have some whimsical texture. It kind of is almost like a floaty oaty type of category, as one of my other fellow growers would say. But yeah, like cress is something that I would plant in small amounts of, maybe intercropping it with something, but I'm not going to dedicate a lot of space to it and allowing it to self-reseed. Next photo over here is actually 1 day after the last photo that I just showed you. And this is the first group of CSA vase arrangements. So this is the June arrangement. We are now in mid-June. And again, I want to point out that the majority of this vase arrangement is made up of perennialized flowers. There are some lilies in here that I did plant for the first time, but I am looking to perennialize all of them. They're all out either in crates or in the ground, so I should be able to replicate this for next year. Now, you're going to see that these are basically the same flowers as before, but we do have a couple of different types of lilies in here, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about why you might want different types of lilies. But I just want you to focus on the different types of colors that we have here. So every vase arrangement looked a little bit different, even though they had the same exact flowers. And I would say that the lilies do a really, really great job of bulking up the entire arrangement and making it feel really full. It also gives a really great vase life here because it has multiple bloom heads and they will bloom at different times. Now, I know that one of the main drawbacks of lilies is the fact that one, it smells, and two, it's obviously very toxic to animals, especially cats. So I totally understand that lilies may not be a fit for everyone, but I have found that lilies do very well in general in the retail market. And when I do have lilies or things like foxglove, which are also toxic, by the way, larkspur, delphinium, those are also pretty toxic too. I have a little sticker on the bouquet wrap that says, please keep away from pets, do not eat. So to address the piece though about lily smelling, there are different types of lilies that you can buy that are hybridized to not smell. So in this case, I do have non-scented lilies and I do have scented lilies. And everyone who signed up for this CSA vase arrangement filled out a form letting me know whether or not, one, they could have lilies in their vase based off of whether or not they had pets, and two, whether or not they were okay with the smell. And literally all of them who signed up for this were like, give me all the lilies that you can get. Now let's go a few days later. We are now entering to later June. And you can see that these bouquets still have the same types of flowers as before. So illustrating a pretty long bloom window. We're already at like 2 weeks for some of these flowers, but we're still getting like good looking bouquets that still look different and dynamic, right? And that is reflective of the fact that I have really a lot of different colored lilies that make it really flexible for me to make different types of bouquets. The yarrow itself comes in multiple different colors. And now you can also see the sea holly is starting to slightly change color. This is like my favorite time for sea holly because I feel like it's getting that blue, that pop of blue that's really hard to find in most flowers, but it's still not smelling yet. And sea holly also lasts forever. So a bouquet like this is amazing because literally all of the ingredients in there will last for like a good 10 days, if not longer. So again, another photo over here. This is 2 days later. So we're now like June 20th. By the way, on the Patreon article, I have all of the dates so you can see exactly what dates these photos are from. And you can see same flowers, but now I have mountain mint coming in a lot more consistently. I also have some more bells of Ireland, which is a really great workhorse that you could probably overwinter. So I'm going to trial overwintering this year to see if I can get them earlier for spring. But if you planted them in the spring, you would get multiple stems per bells of Ireland. In fact, I had so many stems, I couldn't sell all of them. But I also have a sunflower in here, and I wanted to point out that you can totally achieve bouquets with another type of focal, such as a sunflower, but I really like the ability to use lilies because of course lilies are perennial. Other perennials that you can use in place of this are roses. If you invest in bare roots or just like go to your local hardware store, nursery during clearance, get some roses, put them in the ground, you should be able to also achieve roses at this time as a focal. Typically, at this point, peony season is going to be over. You might be able to store some peonies, but it is a little bit more difficult to find a focal. And what I found during this time of year is that flower farmers do struggle with putting together bouquets because they don't have that oomph that a good focal gives. And that is why I did go into 2024 investing in a lot more lilies, knowing that that was a gap that I saw in year 2. I want to hammer home a point here that like mid-late June, so many flowers like coming out of my nose. I was selling at that local retail store. I was selling CSA vase arrangements, and I was also selling at my local cooperative. I had so many flowers that I basically partnered with a local business to do a bouquet bar. And so this is, I have a whole video on a bouquet bar that I did. If you want to watch it, it's up here. So this is the same exact bouquet bar as in the photo, but basically I brought lilies, I brought yarrow, I brought some bells of Ireland, which were not perennialized, as well as sunflowers that are not perennialized. And I think that was basically it. I didn't have a ton of ingredients, but most of the ingredients that I brought were perennialized. And so that really helps reduce the cost of the ingredients because the labor portion of growing those flowers is significantly cut back down. And obviously I didn't have to pay for plugs or seeds to get these flowers. All right, so I want to end this by showing you what my haul 2 days after that bouquet bar looked like. This is my haul to the wholesale cooperative that I sold at. Again, there are some additional annuals in here. I think the only one that I didn't mention here was corn cockle. I did like a trial run of corn cockle. They do really well. Wholesale, I'm not so sure about retail. I think the flowers are just a little bit too, they're not long lasting enough for me to want to put them in retail bouquets, but you can see the majority of my haul is also powered by perennials. I would say that sea holly and yarrow, having gone through 2 whole seasons, were by far my top most profitable crops for that reason. And I think that the mountain mint as well as the lilies, while not as profitable as the sea holly and yarrow because they're not as productive, mainly being that lilies are just one stem and mountain mint, while you can grow a ton of it, you can only use so much of it and you can only sell so much of it. They're all equally important to have because when you are in a pinch and you need to fill up a bouquet, they're great ingredients to have. Important takeaways for everyone. One is that you can achieve different looking bouquets with the same perennial flowers. And that is, again, making sure you diversify in color as well as habit. By habit, I mean like shape of a flower. So for example, there's different types of mints out there. There's different types of lilies. Some are single flowering, some aren't single flowering. If you go into roses, there's a bunch of different types of habits for roses, right? So just think about all the different ways in which flowers might be in the same family, but could look different. And think about how they might play a role in a bouquet, what you might be lacking, and go with that, right? So another point on that is like sea holly. Sea holly has such great textural interest that few other flowers can provide. So that's why I always think having a little bit of sea holly is really great for anyone looking to make mixed bouquets. It is possible to achieve a long window of less work flowers for bouquets, especially focusing on flowers that have those really, really long bloom windows. I would say that of the flowers that I grew in here, lilies technically, they kind of fit in that and they don't. The problem with lilies is that once they are ready to blow open, they will blow open. You need a cooler to keep them from blowing open. But other flowers such as yarrow, sea holly, even foxglove, they have a lot more flexibility and they don't necessarily need to be held in a cooler, assuming it's not raging hot outside. But if it's typical spring weather, you can actually hold them outside, at least for like a day or two, and not need cooler space. So that is really important for me because I don't have an official walk-in cooler or a big cooler. I just have a regular refrigerator. So all of that refrigerator real estate goes to lilies in this case. The third one over here is that you can stagger bloom time of certain perennials, such as lilies, by investing in different varieties. So I'm talking about lilies here because that's the type of flower that I've had the most experience with. But by making sure you buy different varieties of lilies, and because there's so many different types of hybrids now, you have like 5-6 choices. I primarily buy 3 types of lilies. I buy the LA hybrids, which bloom first. I buy the OT hybrids, which bloom second. And then I buy rose lilies, which bloom third. Those are the double lilies. And even within those categories, the different varieties will bloom a little bit earlier or later to each other. So for example, if you buy a mixed crate of lilies, you will find that all of the speckled lilies that are either like pink with burgundy or yellow with burgundy will flower first. Then something like a salmon color, like a Minorca, is going to flower next. Then some of the pinks are going to flower. So even though you buy a mixed crate, the mix of colors are not going to all flower at the same time. They're going to be staggered in how they flower, and that's because of the variety. If you do your homework and buy lilies that are staggered in different bloom times, I am able to get lilies all the way from late May all the way through, I would say, like mid-July. So that is about 2 months worth of lilies. And I am able to achieve that also by making sure I bring some of the crates of lilies into our pole barn where it is warmer, so they get a jump start. Those lilies will start blooming first, then the lilies outside, even the lilies in the ground versus those planted in the crate versus those planted in raised beds. Even if they're the same variety, they might actually have different staggered bloom windows. So also giving me a little bit more of a longer window to harvest. And then of course the rose lilies bloom last, and the bigger the rose lily I found, the longer it takes for them to bloom. So this year, I think I had my last rose lily almost nearly at the end of July, which was awesome. And then the one reminder I wanna make is that there are a lot of tall type of spring flowers that might be even like little spiky. And in year 2, I found myself in a situation where I was so excited to overwinter all of this stuff. And all of a sudden it was larkspur, some delphinium, some snapdragons, and yarrow come to bloom. And it was really hard to make a full looking or even a good looking bouquet out of that. You had the yarrow that was just like a little bit short. You had the delphinium that was just like towering. You had the snapdragon that just didn't feel like it was fitting there. Oh, and I had foxglove too, right? So that was a really great learning for me because it made me realize, okay, you need to think about when the stuff that you put in the fall that you want to bloom in the spring is actually going to bloom, because each flower has a different window for when they bloom. So one of the reasons why I wanted to make these photos visual and give you time periods on when they bloom is, even though you might live in a different zone than me, a different climate than me, you might have flowers blooming at different times. The pattern in which the flowers are blooming, if you're growing the same type as me, should be the same, meaning you should not be able to get mountain mint earlier than something like a foxglove. To wrap this video up, I know that many of you might be embarking on your first year of flower farming. You're really eager to get some spring plants in, and I will say that it is not too late to start early in the spring, get your plants in, and get some sort of harvest by late spring. You're always going to get a better and more robust harvest if you overwinter in the fall. But if you are a little bit late to the game, or you just haven't had the ability to overwinter, it's not too late. But when you are putting in these plants, go beyond just saying, okay, I think this flower looks really pretty, and I think that that one also looks really pretty. Like, think about just how they might go together in a bouquet based off of bloom time. So next year, some new stuff that I have going into the ground, I ordered Baptisia, which is a really great workhorse perennial, because not only will it give you filler throughout the spring, it will continue to give you filler throughout the summer, as well as even the fall. I have some echinacea, which will be later in the season, so not necessarily spring, but more like late spring, summer type of time frame. I've got some alliums that are more late spring alliums, and we also have some agistache. So the agistache that I got this year had really grown big to the point where I was cutting agistache for fall. Now that's the thing, a lot of these flowers that you are getting in the spring might actually give you another small flush in the fall. That flush in the fall is not going to be as great, it's not going to be as tall, but you will still be able to get usable stems out of it. And that's why I think that it is worth having a space in your field to have plants like these, because you will be able to get a double benefit from them throughout the year. Now, I think that this approach in general, in terms of thinking about how do I work less for more variety, is really suited for a backyard gardener, someone who isn't super confined to space, but also doesn't have like a ton of space. I mean, maybe I guess if you had a ton of space, now you have a lot of room to do something like this. But I think that it's really great for someone with like just a manageable size background who's looking to pump out like anywhere from 10 to 20 bouquets a week. this is something that you might want to consider. If you're doing this part-time, if you've got a really busy full-time job, or you've got really young kids, like this is an approach that we should all be taking, because I think a lot of us go into this wanting to work with the flowers, wanting to design with the flowers. There's this aspect of wanting to grow and nurture it, but you will have plenty of other opportunity to grow from seed, to grow from plugs. I think just having a variety, a backup safety net of perennials is really, really helpful in this situation. So again, if you want more information, it's $5 a month to join my Patreon. On the very bottom, I have some lists of suppliers that I've been buying from. So I go into detail about lilies as well as some perennials. So just as suggestions for you guys. But let me know if you found this helpful for you, because I could do a similar type of video on summer and fall. But yeah, let me know, and hopefully I will see you guys soon. And in the meantime, here's a quick update on E. Seven.
Eight. 9. 10.
Good job.